Okay, seems that we are almost ready. We're about to start. I'm waiting from the last checkups from the technical people. Okay. Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. We have a very packed event here today. I'm Mattia Bagnoli, ANSA correspondent here in Brussels. ANSA is the National Italian News Agency. We have our keynote speakers that today they will guide us and through the this topic is very timely. The challenge of the green transition for the aviation sectors, and we all know that air travel is sexy. Planes are sexy. We all love to travel, to fly, but the sector maybe is facing greater challenges than others when facing the green transition. So we'll hear from our panelists and our keynote speakers what we are facing in terms of developments in the sector. So without further ado, I will give the floor to the keynote speakers. So on my list, I have Mr. Marco Campomenosi, and please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Bagnoli. It's a great pleasure for me to host all of you here. I'm an Italian member of a transport committee, and it will be a pleasure. I know Mr. Hololei, of course, it's a great pleasure to have you, because what we are listening here today is very interesting. It's totally in line with what we are as legislators doing here in the European institutions. The Pact for the Decarbonization of Air Transport is something for which I think it will be interesting for us to know. It's an update about what the enterprises, in this case, in my country, Italy, are doing. But I think that we have many of these good cases all over the European Union. The efforts made by Aeroporti di Roma, for us, Italians, are very clear. I think also my colleague that will come later to join the panel will confirm this. And they have already presented this pact in Italy, in the Italian Chamber in September. We, as legislators, know very well that the role of the European Union is important, not only for what we already did, not me, of course, but the MEPs and commissioners here many years ago, for the competition of the sector, for which air carriers, airports, and passengers are very important, and for which our not only the European connectivity, but also the freight transport is important. Actually, we are working on different topics which are at different moment close to the end of a legislative production, of a legislative producer. We speak about ETS, the emission trade system, fuel EU aviation, for which also we are very close. Of course, we are also close to the reform of the so-called AFIR, Alternative Fuels Infrastructure Regulation, and then the single European sky, which is maybe a bit more complex because the Council has not the level of ambitions of the European Parliament, or at least of our great rapporteur, Mr. Marinescu, no? Which is not only a good colleague, but also an expert of the sector. But I'm also confident on the fact that also on European sky we could have good developments soon. Of course, on the slot regulations, especially during the pandemic, the European Commission and us, we had to work closely in order to have more flexibility, to help the companies, and we are coming out to say to a moment for which, out of the pandemic, we are ready to restart to develop the sector for all the potential that they could give to all of us. Regarding fuel aviation, I would like to mention that the efforts made by the Parliament are very important. For example, on this sustainable aviation fuels, the requirements for suppliers, obligations. So in this case, of course, we are speaking about a sector for which ambition has to be concrete and has to be balanced because, of course, we need also to have flexibility and to find the best solutions in order not to ask too much to the enterprises. But I think that it's a good challenge for which we could work all together. On the single European sky, I've already mentioned the fact that at the moment, how to say, we are waiting for an opening, how to say, from the Council, because some member states are quite reluctant. Politically speaking, of course, this is not the role of speaking politically. It's about the fact that the targets we are asking for as legislators are important. In some cases, we are divided on the paths, on the ways to find the same aims, to the same results, because transition is nowadays an idea, a concept for which every political group is engaged. This is something for which, as a center-right politician, I would say maybe my side later than the others, but now we are all engaged on these things, and of course we have to build an infrastructure for which we could develop everything in a good way. The connectivity of the future will ask maybe the airport sectors to have more links with the railway sector, for which I think we are also working very well. Aeroporti di Roma is a good example in this way, but not only Aeroporti di Roma. Of course, today we are focused our attention to you. There is a question of competition. In this case, competition between different sectors. I am a shadow rapporteur on the TEN-T. I know very well how also this aspect has to be relevant and important. For the rest, of course, the aim of to have a 2050 with net zero emission, to have maybe a social sustainability regarding all our efforts, I think are the guidelines about what we are doing. And of course, it's a great pleasure for me to hear from you, from our guests, from the panelists later, which are the development and exchange of ideas, which I think is very useful for our jobs, our activity here as well. Thank you very much to be here.
Thank you, Mr. Camporamenosi. Our second keynote speaker of the first part of this meeting today is Mr. Claudio Eminente from ENAC, which is the Italian Civil Aviation Authority. So please, sir, you have the floor.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. As a representative of the Italian Civil Aviation Authority, ENAC, it's a great pleasure to take part in this event, to witness the progress of this Italian initiative promoted by Aeroporti di Roma in collaboration with the Politecnico di Milano. This agreement represents concrete evidence of how seriously our country is working to find suitable solutions to address the impact that the air transport sector can have on the climate, with the certainty that this best practice will not only benefit national civil aviation, but can also be a source of inspiration for other European countries. There is a strong awareness of how much the speed and efficiency that distinguish air transport have contributed to global connectivity and mobility, furthering the development of the socio-economic well-being of entire territories and generation, and the world as we know it today. At this historical moment, it's essential to put in place a process of transformation and revolution aimed at limiting the carbon footprint on the environment, and thus concretize the process of reconciliation between air transport and the environment. The development of best practice is an essential first step toward the creation of a uniform regulatory framework that introduces sustainability standards that will enable the achievement of a European Union net zero carbon emissions by 2050 and to meet the additional European goals by 2030. In order to bring these ambitious challenges to its completion, therefore, the need for the importance of the role played by institutions, both national and European, that have made sustainable development a pillar of the common transport policy is evident. ENAC and Italy are working to create a cutting-edge sector to deliver to new generation a green, futuristic and environmental-friendly civil aviation. The Italian Civil Aviation Authority is indeed a strategic organization capable of effectively managing relations with different stakeholders and, above all, able to look to the future and the opportunities offered by technological development with particular attention to the issues of environmental sustainability through decarbonization. Environmental protection, decarbonization, energy efficiency, and rational use of resources are concepts that are destined to become the basis of a renewed and different policy that guides civil aviation toward reconciliation with the environment. ENAC's goals are clear: build a sustainable future and improve the quality of life, including through the use of advanced air mobility, enhance smart mobility with electric and hydrogen-powered air vehicles and innovative infrastructure, create an ecosystem to guide the nation toward the third dimension, the Air One, in full compliance with the sustainability targets. There are a variety of measures that will be taken to foster the decarbonization of aviation through the development of new technologies to improve connectivity and increase accessibility to transportation networks, foster reconciliation between aviation and the environment by reducing inequalities. However, it should be pointed out that these measures are entirely in line with awareness towards environmental issues that has characterized our sector for several years now. In fact, in the last years, the investment in the national airport systems infrastructure has always been characterized by an almost total focus on digitalization, technological innovations, and development of sustainable energy sources. ENAC's focus on sustainable issues extends to all airport infrastructure in our territory, from airports directly managed by ENAC to those currently under concession of the various airport operating companies. The rationalization of airport infrastructure and their use in a green key, urban and advanced air mobility to simplify micro mobility and logistics, space economy with the curtailed spaceport and suborbital flights are some of the aspects that, for example, ENAC is implementing to concretize the achievement of sustainability and decarbonization goals with the involvement of all stakeholders. In addition, in the energy domain, ENAC is committed to optimizing the energy efficiency of domestic airports by increasing the deployment of alternative sources of electricity production, such as photovoltaic panels, and collaborating with other entities. This is in fact the case of ENEA, Energia Nucleare Energie Alternative, an Italian public body with which ENAC is working to define and implement forms of synergy in the energy and environmental areas. Confirming ENAC's commitment to this green perspective, ENAC has recently published a draft issue of the PNA, National Airports Plan, a policy and a technical guideline document for the development of air transport and the airport system, which aims to enhance the competitiveness of the national economic system by implementing the sector's ecological and digital transition. The plan introduces a new concept of travel by air, which is based on intermodality and the use of sustainable next-generation aircraft, thus creating an ecosystem accessible, reliable, efficient and safe, and outlines mobility with low environmental impact, such as advanced air mobility. In line with the indication contained in the plan, it's essential to invest in the implementation and use of alternative fuels and other sustainable power types, such as electric and hydrogen, ensuring infrastructure compatibility develop and share best practice for the green aviation of the future. And today's event can be an example of this, including smart buildings, renewable energy, sustainable mobility, resilient development, development of SAFs and low-carbon aviation fuel. ENAC's aim, through the definition of the P&A and the creation of external form of collaboration, is in fact to foster the implementation of a development model for the next generation aviation sector, which is based on the concept of transformative resilience, understood as the system's ability not only to passively resist the impact of climate change and respond to the needs of the present, but to actively evolve toward a more sustainable future, seizing the opportunities that technological and global economic evolution will bring in the coming years, consistent with European targets. Thank you for the attention.
Thank you. And then we have our third keynote speaker, Mr. Stefano Verrecchia, who's the Italian ambassador to Coreper 2, and Coreper 1, sorry, and which is the committee who actually oversees the transport and energy. So please give us your thoughts.
Thank you so much. Honorable members, ladies and gentlemen, dear friends, this afternoon event is important for the aviation sector, giving us an opportunity to address together some of the key themes we are facing in the world of transportation today. It is a pleasure to stay here with you, and I wish to thank in particular Mr. Marco Troncone, CEO of Aeroporti di Roma, for taking this initiative. I can only but express Italy's strong support to an important initiative aimed at decarbonizing the air transport, which is one of the key challenges we face in pursuing climate neutrality by 2050. For years, if not decades, the aviation sector has been accused of not being sustainable, sometimes earning a bad reputation as the most polluting means of transport. At the same time, we simply must recognize the air transportation is bound to remain a driver and enabling factor for overall economic growth. The surge in air travel after the COVID pandemic demonstrates that air travel remains essential in its contribution to global connectivity, thereby bolstering global socio-economic development. We must therefore come together as regulators, scientific community and industry players in reducing air travel's impact on human health and environmental sustainability. The Pact for Decarbonization promoted by Aeroporti di Roma is, in our view, a best practice in this regard that merits our support and could be a good example for also other European countries. The Pact brings together all the stakeholders involved in the green transition phase, from tech firms to associations to the academia and policy makers, in crafting a roadmap in order to pave the way leading to a net zero emissions aviation sector. The project is in particular a very important step for Italy as a concrete model to promote air transport decarbonization in line with the regulatory instruments that we are actively crafting at the national level and together with our EU partners. In this regard, as you know, we are now at an important juncture as we negotiate with the European Parliament the final aspects of the Fit for 55 climate package, including the EU aviation regulation, which will of course have a major impact on the future of air transportation. We are convinced that the aviation sector needs targeted policies in order to reach the objectives of climate neutrality while enabling a further expansion and development of air transport. In order to reach these goals, we believe the industry needs clear binding rules and objectives that can be achieved along a rational path and through intermediate targets. Through RefuelEU, what we are trying to do is to craft a positive policy that is able to promote and develop the market of sustainable aviation fuels, the so-called SAFs. We all hope that a SAF file can be closed soon, as it will surely help aviation to become more sustainable, even though it cannot be the only answer. More synergies need to be put in place also at regulatory level, making sure that the way regulators address the aviation sectors is coherent with the overall climate strategy we are putting in place, especially when it comes to the multifaceted approach to the transport sector. I'm confident that this debate will feed into our work. I will also keep following the Pact's work with great interest and look forward to the ideas and solutions it will be able to bring to the crucial debate on the future of transport. And with this, thank you so much, and I wish you a very good job for the rest of the day.
Thank you so much. And we have here Henrik Hololei, who is the Director General of DG MOVE. So the European institution have been called into action. Here we have one.
Thank you. Thank you very much, and very good afternoon to all of you, honorable members, ambassador, ladies and gentlemen, dear friends. It's a very timely event, and I'm very happy to be here, invited to address you. I was also very keen to come to see, of course, my friend Marco, and I still remember very vividly the excellent tour that we had in Aeroporti di Roma during summer, and where you also showed the extremely impressive upgrades that you have been doing there, and of course getting ready for the future, as well as many of the challenges. So even more so was I keen to come here, and since the topic is very topical about the making aviation more sustainable, then there are also positive examples that Aeroporti di Roma itself can share, and which I would also definitely like to underline. But let's look at the bigger picture. Aviation is back after the COVID, and of course many challenges that were there over the last years, including the brutal Russian aggression in Ukraine here in Europe. Despite of all that, aviation is getting close to where it was in 2019 when the COVID kicked in. The flights in the EU have become close to what they were before the COVID. We are about 87–86%, and of course it is good to see that the trend is definitely upwards. Italy is the 5th largest market when it comes also to the flights, and there has been a very good progress compared to last year. I mean, the number of flights in Italy have grown 45%, so that also actually is one of the fastest recovering markets that we are seeing now, and being only about 12% from the 2019 levels. Of course, this is about the flights. The number of passengers still has some way to go, but this is also already way above 80% and also growing. So this is all good things. I think that this also shows that people like to fly. There were a lot of doomsday theories at the time when we had COVID, that there will be no business travel, people will not want to come back and fly. That was absolutely wrong, because the kind of demand we saw during this summer was absolutely remarkable, and it continues to be so also when we look at the forward booking. So yes, there is going to be quite a busy time, despite of the uncertainties that we are living through, despite of all the challenges that we are having also in the economic side, despite of the high inflation, people are still very keen to take a plane or any other means, and most importantly, to travel in Europe and beyond. And I think that that also puts challenges to us, because I think everybody who took a plane last summer still might be traumatized, because the challenges that we experienced in different locations, in the airports, but also on the planes, because of the lack of staff in the security controls, in the getting our luggage to the destination. This all was something which was, of course, sent shockwaves throughout the aviation value network last summer. And I think that everybody in the aviation value network today will say that, or ecosystem, as you prefer, would say never again. We definitely don't want our passengers, our traveling public, to go through what they had to go through last summer. And that's why it is essential to be ready for this summer. And that, of course, only can be achieved in very close collaboration by all players of the aviation ecosystem. Even if one player is not delivering, it means that the whole chain is having an impact. And that's why the airports, the airlines, the air navigation service providers, but equally the governments with their passport controls, those who deliver the security controls, ground handlers and so on, they all need to be ready for next summer. And I have no doubt that Aeroporti di Roma is among those who is ready for next summer, because I think it was one of the best performing airports also during last summer when we had many challenges, because they started early and they were also more forward-looking and being ready to deliver. So this is something where also the aviation sector is going to be very much tested in the next months ahead. And that is, I think, very important why we all need to work together, including, of course, the regulators. But having said that, what we have in the immediate future, which is continuously strong demand, people want to fly, but also the possibility of disruption as well as the uncertainties around, we need to see also what is the biggest challenge for aviation in the next years, in the next decades to come. And that is, as has been said also by the previous speakers, it is obviously the sustainability of the whole sector. Aviation simply cannot continue as business as usual. I think everybody agrees with that. And aviation has to become more sustainable. I would never say that there should be less aviation, but what I would say is that the more we have aviation, the more sustainable this aviation also has to be. And I think this is the societal demand. This is also something what the sector itself has finally very well understood. But something where, for example, when we talk about the airport community, where they started much earlier and setting up the airport accreditation program for the green airports, all these kind of steps were already put in place, and I think that they have also yielded them a good results, and need to do so also in the future. But aviation is not easy to be decarbonized and to make more sustainable. There are, of course, many developments which are happening. Of course, we have more performant aircrafts, we have lighter airframes, we have better engines. We even have better flight paths occasionally when the ANSPs are ready to deliver that. And since we still don't have the single European sky, which is a big shame, and I think that that was also said by the previous speakers, how can we are there? I want to pay a tribute to the Parliament, to the TRAN committee, especially to Mr. Marinescu, which was also mentioned by Honourable Member Campo-Menosi, but also the team there, because the ambition of the Parliament in delivering single European sky is not comparable to the non-ambition that we see in the Council. But nevertheless, we need to push forward. We are very much with the Parliament. We want to see the results, and we have to see the results, because if we want to have more sustainable aviation, and we know that there are no easy and fast measures that can deliver that, then we could cut 10% of the emissions in aviation in Europe if we would have better flight paths and if we would be able to deliver the single European sky. So really, I think that also the regulators and the states owe it to the airspace users and to the whole sector, because you can't expect the sector to become more sustainable if you don't give the possibilities for that and if you don't deliver things which are actually making a difference. But having said all that, and of course we all know that the future will also bring zero-emission aircrafts, be they electric, hybrid electric, hydrogen aircraft, but this is still takes time until they become a norm, and even if they are, they will be probably operating only on ultra short haul or very short haul destinations or city pairs. So this is not the short term or the medium term solution. Maybe long term when you have new technologies being deployed and developed, but again, we are not there yet. So what and where do we need to focus? And again, that was already mentioned earlier. It is, of course, the sustainable aviation fuels. Sustainable aviation fuels is going to be the single most important component of this so-called basket of measures, which allows the aviation to become more sustainable. We calculated it takes about 60% to 2/3 in 2050, which is saved when the CO2 is abated through the extensive use of the sustainable aviation fuels. And that's why also we have tabled the Refuel EU Aviation proposal, which is currently in the trilogue mode. We had a very serious trilogue in December was it November? And we all hoped that after 9 hours of discussions, we will be able to come to a good conclusion, because I think the package on the table was very promising. But unfortunately, that was not the day to happen. So we need to work on this again with the new presidency, the Swedish presidency, and of course in close cooperation and collaboration with the Parliament. And the Commission is there to facilitate, because we can't lose a single day more than we have already lost. And we really hope that in the next weeks it will be possible to find the compromise, which also sends a strong signal to the market, to the fuel producers, and of course to everyone who will be there in order to support the industrialization of this production, because there is a long way to go until we get to the blending levels that we expect. But at the same time, 2025 and 2030 are not very far away. So this is something where we really need to focus. This is something which is extremely important. And this is something where, again, it's in the interest of everybody in the aviation ecosystem. Of course, coming back to the airports, there is no doubt that there is a readiness to the airports to deliver, because as long as the fuel producers bring a blended fuel to the market, then it's the same as you do today with the kerosene. So it doesn't need to make a big efforts in the future when green liquid hydrogen is also, liquefied hydrogen is also available. That, of course, means that the airports have to do more investments in order to create the infrastructure, but we are not there yet. But what is very important is also to invest in making electricity available in the airport, and also using the different tools that you have, for example, the electric airport shuttles, cars, all the towing machines, and so on, which is actually the case in many of the airports already. But talking about the sustainability and also talking about our host, the Aeroporti di Roma, I just want to commend what they have been achieving. They have been putting down a very clear commitment to become net zero by 2030. You have also made efforts in terms of energy efficiency, the reduction of 50% of electricity consumption since 2009, thanks to the large investments in lighting and more efficient air conditioning and the use of renewable energy. I think this is also a very good example. You have been able to decrease steadily the emissions per passenger over the last decade. Also in terms of noise, which plays an important role, you have been able to build artificial dunes of 4 to 6 meters alongside the runway to limit the noise while taxiing, and also plant barrier alongside the motorway. And I think that all these measures, of course, what you have been doing, as well as cutting the reduction of water consumption, which is halved in the last 10 years, shows also your environmental commitment. And this is no surprise why your airport has also been given the airport carbon accreditation 4+, which is the maximum number that one can achieve. So it's very important to continue in this path. It's a long way to go. It is very important to get all the aviation ecosystem closely involved. And I think that is going to make the difference, because we need that difference, and we really need to contribute as much as we can to make aviation more sustainable, and also use all the tools that we have. On this, I would also like to mention, of course, the issues related to capacity. I mean, the capacity in the air, we are well aware, the challenges and also the congestion we used to see in the past, and which is already coming back. We saw that also last summer, and the challenge again is the 2023, because it's not only about the disruption on the ground it's also very much the potential disruption in the air. European airspace is in a much more challenging position as it was a few years ago, because we have today about 80% of airspace available, and we have now more than 90% of the flights in the airspace. So what does it mean and how? Well, it's obviously related to the Russian aggression, because there is much more military activity in the European airspace also by the military aircrafts, which means that more of the civilian airspace has to be dedicated for the military purposes, for surveillance flights, for all kinds of training flights. And of course, we have never had so many military aircrafts in the European airspace as we have had over the last 6 months. And that, of course, has an effect, because already congested airspace is going to become even more congested if we are not doing everything in our disposal to avoid that. But the capacity on the ground is also a big challenge in the medium and long term, and already in some places the short term. It's difficult to enlarge the airports, and the question then becomes, are we really using efficiently everything that is possible on the ground? Are we using the current tools efficiently? Are we using the slots efficiently? And of course, these are the questions that we need to address and discuss also in the next years to come, and to find solutions how we can increase the efficiencies, how you can increase the capacity so that aviation is also able to continue to provide a pleasurable experience to the traveling public. The last point I want to make in this context is, of course, innovation. Innovation plays a very big role. Aviation is a sector which over the last 100 years, when the civil aviation has existed, has contributed significantly in innovative solutions and continues to do so. And it has also been in the front line, and I think that it is important to continue on that way. So digital solutions, digitalization plays a big role. Also the use of the artificial intelligence. We know that we can make our aviation safer, we can make our aviation more efficient by using all these tools, and they are going to play a bigger role in the future. And that also means that there are new entrants in the market which are going to make a difference. And when I'm talking about the innovative air mobility, which in a more simple way it is called the drones, which are emerging in our low altitude airspace in the next years to come, making a big difference, creating a lot of new opportunities, and delivering on many fronts for the public services, for the freight transport, but even ultimately and eventually also for the human transportation, which I think is going to be a very, very exciting chapter in the history of aviation. So that also means that there has to be the readiness of the airports to accommodate that, and of course to make sure that the safety and security will be maintained on the highest level. I'm again very well aware that the Aeroporti di Roma is part of the work that has been done in Italy in order to develop the innovative air mobility, and of course with that experience they can surely share the best practices also with many others in Europe. So I think a lot of challenges, a lot of opportunities, and most important is that we will be able to face them, overcome them, and make sure that aviation continues to serve well the societies, but in doing so in a much more sustainable way than it has until now. So once again, thank you very much for having me here, and very keen also to listen to the interesting debate that is soon to come. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your words. You've given us quite a very heavy load of food for thoughts. And now I'll give the floor to Marco Troncone, the CEO of Aeroporti di Roma, for his speech. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Director General, for your vision, for your kind words. And of course, thanks for all the participants for the time and the attention that they're dedicating today to this endeavor, and of course to the works of this initiative. So just a few charts to explain why we're doing this effort, where we're coming from. So a bit of context before everything. The overall context today is a challenging one. It's not a supportive one. We've seen, based on the outcome of the last COP in Sharm el-Sheikh last year, COP27, it was anticipated to be a difficult one. Some said a flop. Certainly we can say it was not a success. Yes, progress on the loss and damage, on equality, on supporting, bearing the costs of the transition, but no progress on emission reduction. Certainly no progress on the reduction or elimination of fossil fuels. So altogether, not really a great progress. Not a surprise, because the overall political context is not a supporting one. Today, fighting global gas emissions and climate change is not the top priority in times in which energy security, energy independence is certainly a priority, in times in which putting together a global agenda, which is of the essence when tackling this issue, is hard, in terms of decoupling of tensions. And also in times in which also the public opinion, the political agenda in many states, we've seen also the last political campaign in Italy, fighting global climate change was not really at the center of the agenda. But of course, this is due to change soon. Meanwhile, the problem is, if possible, is of course worsening. The targets which have been reaffirmed of containing the increase of global temperature maximum of 1.5 degrees by 2050 is confirmed, but we will, of course, this target seems more and more out of reach. Commitments are not sufficient. Many states do not have a real roadmap, and actually the global thermometer is going, it's moving, but of course in the wrong direction. 1.1 degrees above pre-industrial average is already there. But this means that, of course, this issue will be becoming more and more urgent when these distractions on the global agenda will disappear. And in that times, in the medium term, probably one of the sectors which would probably be in a more risky position will be the aviation sector. In times when the issue will be, again, becoming more and more urgent, and when in the list of the bad sectors, possibly the aviation sector will acquiring new positions, where that time we probably will face a very vulnerable, very dangerous situation. Often we say in the sector that we account for some 2% of the global problem, which cannot be an alibi by all means. This only means that our billion tons of CO2 equivalents are a visible, maybe not a prevailing, but a visible part of a massive problems made of 50 billion tons of CO2, so a massive one. And also that 2% promises to possibly increase in the medium term. In 5 to 2 years' time, there's an analysis you can see in this chart. A possible increase by 2030 may actually double that number, because the carbon intensity of the sector will not change materially in the short term, and because the other sectors, the less hard to abate, of course, will make some progress. So at that time, when again the attention will again refocus on the issue, and the aviation sector will still be a bit in the middle of that path, we cannot risk to be, let me say, criticized by public opinion. Some flash shaming trends are already in place, but of course we cannot be, let me say, subject to restrictive of punishing policies made of, again, restriction or punitive taxation. This is the risk we have to avoid in a situation in which actually potential policies which may advocate for a reduction of flying actually are not really the way forward, certainly not on the medium-long-haul segments. The sector is a crucial one, is a strategic one for many economies, especially economies which rely a lot on global connectivity for their prosperity, for their cultural progress, economic, social progress. And of course, it's a sector which has the power to produce a lot of economic resources, which must be preserved, if not developed, in order to actually be diverted and dedicated to the initiatives that have to be financing a transition which promises to be extremely complex and extremely costly. And these resources will have to come from the sector itself. So it's just a matter, again, to give the right direction to the allocation of the resources, not rather to reduce the resources that that sector can actually produce. And in this situation in which, again, what we may face in the short term, in the next 5 to 10 years, in which the sector may face very, very hard times, we have to have a very credible and convincing answer, which, of course, must be based on a clear, aligned, science-based roadmap towards the solution which is there. The science indicates that the solution is possible, that a zero emission aviation sector is possible. It's just a matter, again, to be credible and convincing on how to get there. So in times in which actions, aspirations, targets, plans, initiatives, projects multiply, and in a sector in which the actors which concur to this transition are very many, not necessarily all integrated, we need to have, again, a common agenda, an integrated table on which to pose an answer for the way forward. And this is basically where we're coming from. In this chart, we see that this is a chart whose source is from the Clean Aviation Joint Undertaking, which is a public-private partnership between the European Commission and the aviation industry. Well, the levers that we can apply are several. Some were also mentioned by Director General Olay regarding the more efficient airspace utilization, but of course also a better performing ATC infrastructure, certainly a more efficient aircraft. But probably the one that you see here highlighted is probably, again, the key lever, so the utilization of sustainable aviation fuels. In fact, basically all the let me say indications about on how to arrive at 2050 in terms of, what are the initiatives which shall produce a progress in terms of reduction of emissions, indicate that more than a half of the problems will be solved, even at that time, even betting on the success of new technologies on SAF. And you see this as an evidence made by all the general consensus of the analysts. And in fact, SAF indeed is at the center of the emerging policies, just thinking about the EU refuel initiatives. Again, no surprise as being SAF a drop-in, ready-to-use technology, which is not calling for significant investments, nor on the aircraft side, and also on the storage and distribution of fuel when it comes to this. But, however, many challenges are ahead of us, and we need to be also clear about that, which may pose some headwind in the medium term regarding SAF. SAF today is produced by biomass, today, especially from waste oils. But there are a number of other biological feedstocks which can help in producing SAF. But many scientific studies indicate that this actually may arrive to a capacity constraint when it comes to, again, feedstock availability in the medium term. There's a study indicating, we'll see that in the next chart, that says that SAF made by bio-based SAF will actually probably support at maximum 5-6% of the jet fuel consumption in the European landscape in the medium term. And possibly in the medium-long term. Hence, the issue will also be to try and work on synthetic SAF, meaning SAF which can be produced by combining CO2, which has to be captured, and green hydrogen. This is a technology which is being identified, but is quite far from being mature, both in terms of production processes, in terms of economical sustainability. Hence also, R&D efforts and R&D initiatives must be focused on this stuff. So we have two phases. Biological SAF, which is produced today, but the production is far from being what the sector actually calls and needs. And so we need production to be accelerated and deployed in more visible ways, and also prepare for the challenge that we'll be facing in the medium and long term when biological SAF will actually hit feedstock constraints. So we have to focus on R&D on synthetic SAF. And also another issue that the science also is indicating is that it will take time to reach an economical sustainability for SAF. In this chart, we're seeing that indicative cost of SAF is today about 3 to 4 times as much the traditional fossil fuel based SAF. fuel. These will actually be going down thanks to economies of scale, to more efficient production processes, but it will take time. Today, the cost differential is massive, is at least making a global average over $100 per passenger on a cost item which normally accounts for 25% of the typical cost structure of an airline. So it's hard also, if ever SAF was available in sufficient quantities, to bear in full the economic burden that this technology would entail. Hence also incentives for the utilization, not only for accelerating the production, but also for utilization of SAF within are of the essence of central importance. Today, this additional cost may be borne in part from the airlines, in part from passengers. Of course, on passengers to a level which will not limit the demand, and for the missing part, again, to preserve a sufficient level of demand and not depressing this market, we will need public subsidies in a fashion which will not be, we think, much dissimilar from what has been done over the last 10, 15 years on renewable energies. Just a good example is, of course, the photovoltaic. Certainly, new technologies, hydrogen-fueled aircraft, also or electrical engines are in the radar screen. A lot of efforts. We have also representatives today here of the two most important aircraft manufacturers are dedicating a lot of energies in this. But again, a common consensus indicates that this will probably not be, again, the lion's share of the solution in the long term. And by all means, this is not an answer, of course, for the short, medium term, whereby, as I said before, a lot of attention and a lot of risks will be posed to the sector. So the key issue will be here to focus on concrete progress on what is actually available. This chart, which was shared in the first annual Congress of this Pact last autumn, again indicates in summary what our scientific advisors actually put together in terms of roadmap and levers. And as you can see, about 2/3 of the emissions reductions will be leveraging on biofuel, plus also synthetic or electrical fuel, as they call it, just for a fourth on efficiency, and on a visible but still minor part on hydrogen and other new technologies. The next chart will be, again, putting a bit more attention on the risks that we see in the short, medium term. So one of the efforts of this initiative was, one of the aims, objectives of this initiative was not only to create an alignment of all stakeholders which shall concur to this transition, not only to pose scientific grounds, so credibility on what may be the solution going forward, but also to manage expectations of our key stakeholders, the market, the finance, and our political stakeholders. In all cases, of course, thanks to the growth that has been rapidly recovered by the sector, in all cases, we'll see the next year a situation in which carbon intensity will be decreasing, but not to a level that, combined with growth, will actually reduce emissions in absolute terms. So we're seeing around the corner times in which the number of tons of CO2, which I was mentioning before, will actually increase. And in that times, we have to be ready, again, on an aligned basis, on a credible basis, on a scientific-based ground, with a roadmap for the future, and with a set of policies which at that time shall be supporting and enabling that transition going forward. So it will be an enabling phase where policies will be key in the next 15 years' time, in which the alignment not only shall be achieved across industry players, but also between the industry and our policymakers. The situation is moving already, and so of course the situation is not still. It's moving. We're seeing a lot of projects on a global basis for the increase in production capacity for SAF, not only in Europe, but also in the Americas. But again, as I said, we're still pretty far from what is needed. So again, the importance of supporting policies for production and utilizations will be key. With an approach which we deem might be different. We're seeing an approach in US which probably is a bit different from what we're seeing in Europe. Is a bit, you know, stick and carrot approach. Is probably more a carrot approach in US, where there is in the last let me say Inflation Reduction Act, which was issued last summer, this will provide significant tax shields, tax advantages for utilization of SAF in excess of $1.5 per gallon, which is a material advantage. Some signs also in the United Kingdom last year, we've seen an initial package supporting the projects for new SAF production. In Europe, of course, we're seeing, again, mandates. So we have to achieve certain targets regardless of how actually this may be achieved. This will be left to the industry. So again, we have to be also to receive a balanced approach in times in which the industry is more and more committing anyways to results. So in these charts, we put together some examples, some important airlines, both on the full service traditional legacy space, so Air France KLM, for example, but also on the low cost segments is also very lively in this, Ryanair, but EasyJet is also committing a lot. Airports are doing their job, especially, of course, initially on their own infrastructure, which is relatively easy, but also committing on engaging airlines on achieving certain SAF targets. But of course, again, there is a lot of road to do. We also in Rome have had in 2022 the first drops of SAF running into the engines of ITA Airways, thanks also to the cooperation with ENI, our oil major. But last year, the overall, consumption of SAF accounted for 0.3% of the total consumption. So we're still talking about marginal quantities. So to conclude, basically, we're facing times which probably will become harder than we think today, certainly harder than today, because again, distractions will probably be leaving the context when this situation will be normalizing. I mean, the geopolitical and the energy sector situation in years in which the carbon intensity and the carbon footprint of the sector will not be going down. So in the next 3, 4, 5 years. Hence, we have to have a aligned, credible, science-based answer. Italy has put together this initiative, which we think is an interesting case example, to define the way forward, to advocate for enabling supporting policies, and as I said, and most importantly, to manage expectations, especially for the short, medium term. This initiative has seen the cooperation, basically, of all the sectors. We succeeded in having a common position, a manifesto signed by all players, all actors. So all airlines operating in Italy, all airports, handlers, the manufacturers, and all the other key industry players, which will play an essential role in this transition. So fuel producers, our national rail operator, which of course will play a key part as to the rail air integration, and also our champions, national champions of the electrical transition, they are all on board, and clearly to engage our domestic policymakers. So this initiative has been blessed and supported by the government, by our civil aviation authority, and of course also having our ATC and player, which again, as we said, will also give an essential contribution to this initiative. So in the essence, this is basically where we're coming from, and again, we share the hope messages that also Director General Ololai said. The prospects are challenging, but certainly the solution can be reached if, again, the sector can ensures effectiveness and cohesion and alignment in this effort. Thank you very much.
Thank you. We are now coming to the second session of this day. We managed to land on time, basically. So that is an achievement. I would like to introduce our speakers, our panelists on the second section. We have Philip Cornelis, Director of Aviation, Director General for Mobility and Transport of the European Commission. I have to say that a few of the MEP, our guests, are still busy with their work in the commissions, in the committee, so they will join us if they manage a little bit later. But we have here with us Alessandra Moretti. She works in the ENVI committee, so the Environment Committee of the European Parliament. And we have also with us Olivier Jankovic is there, yes, Director General of ACI Europe, which is the Airports Council International. And we also have with us Thomas Reinhardt over there, Managing Director for Airlines for Europe. So the airlines are here today present too. I would like to say that we've heard so many things in the first session, and it's not easy, clearly, to decarbonize the sector. And I'm a frequent flyer, as many of you probably are here. And our travel is definitely the essence, the quintessence of our age. When we use the English word jet set, we are referring to a time when our travel was exclusive. That's why we say jet set, because they could afford the air traveling, they could afford the jets. Nowadays is different. Accessibility is key. More or less, everybody can afford to get on a plane. But COVID was a huge disruption and actually showed us how dependent we are. I remember at that time when COVID struck, I was in Moscow. I was living there, and I remember vividly when I had to write the story that Moscow was grounding the planes. There was no more air connectivity ever, basically. So we got stuck, and so many of us probably shared so different stories. And so we realized, okay, well, potentially you could drive from Moscow to Milan, for instance, but you cannot drive from New York to Milan, for instance, or to Rome. So that is so much that we are dependent. And before COVID, there was at any time up 1 million people up in the sky, almost a city in the sky. So my point is we are dependent, and can it stay that way? Can we still be dependent? And so, Mr. Cornelis, I want to ask you the first question here, because we heard that emissions are going to go up in the short terms, and so it seems that things need to get worse before they get better. And SAF also, we heard, is key to manage the transitions, and we may need subsidies. And the Americans are doing that with the IRA. So what about the EU? Is that a road that for us is available too?
Thank you very much, and thank you for inviting me also. And I'm very happy that you made it out of Moscow in time and are here with us to talk about what is really important for our joint future. And you expressed it very well too. It is about preserving connectivity for the citizen at large in the longer term. And what I think is very important today and very different from the past is that we are very much aligned between the citizen, the political level, and the industry, which probably was not the case 10 years ago. 10 years ago, in the aviation sector, many were saying, we cannot reduce our emissions, others have to do it, it's not possible for us for physical and technological reasons. This has now completely changed. And I think that the Pact that Mr. Troncone just presented is a very good example of how this has changed and how the whole industry has come together to embrace the need for change that is now seen as really an existential need and something of which people like Mr. Troncone are clearly personally also convinced. is the right way to go. And there are other examples. Waypoint 2050 is there. There's Destination 2050. There's the Toulouse Declaration that was agreed under the French presidency. So we have many examples where we see that everybody's coming together for this joint task, and that is very, very promising. So that will allow us to move on all the fronts to put in place the new aircraft and technologies, to bring the new fuels, improve air navigation, etc. And it provides a very good backdrop for us to adopt also the necessary regulations. And you referred to sustainable fuels is really the critical task and topic for the immediate future, that we really have to be able to ramp up production and use of those sustainable fuels. The industry and the airlines are actually asking for this, even though they are more expensive. They actually want to have more. So this is very, very promising. We hope to be able to adopt this European common blending mandate soon in the Swedish presidency with the support of the Parliament and the Member States. We were very, very close in December to agreeing. Unfortunately, we stumbled over an issue that's not related to aviation, not even related to sustainable fuels, but which is a much more general issue of reliance or not on nuclear energy, and hopefully we'll be able to overcome that difficulty in the interest of promoting the decarbonization of aviation. That is today, in my view, the first task that we have to achieve, and we need for that all the electricity, all the carbon-free electricity that we can get. So we hope with the approach that we have to impose on the fuel suppliers to deliver fuels to the airports, that this will create the legal certainty for the fuel suppliers to actually invest in that production, to actually bring it to the market, which we haven't seen in the past. Even though the technologies exist, there was not such investment. So we think we need that blending mandate in order to start that investment. And I know the fuel suppliers are waiting for the regulation to be adopted to take their final investment decisions. There is, of course, the question of the cost, which is higher for the moment, even though over time we think it will go down, as it was also shown in the graphs. And for the initial period, the Parliament actually put forward this excellent idea to set aside a part of the ETS revenues and use them as SAF allowances to support the cost of sustainable fuels in the first years, at least until the end of this decade. And quite a lot of money is involved. We're talking about 20 million allowances. That is something between 1.5 and 2 billion euros. So it's very, very, very significant. So we will be doing both supporting the uptake of SAF and pushing the uptake of SAF with our blending mandate. The United States is moving in the same direction with the same ambition. They are using only the support. And we are doing actually both. But clearly the objectives are the same.
Thank you for your view. I would like to have a contribution from an MEP. So I'd like to give the floor to Ms. Moretti, and so give us your view on all of this, please.
Thank you so much, Diero. Let me first thank il Patto per la Decarbonizzazione del Trasporto Aereo for organizing this seminar, and thank you to my colleague Campomenosi to invite me, and thank you of our ambassador Verrecchia. We are all aware that the green transition is necessary to achieve EU climate goal and to fight global warming, and that all industrial sectors must participate to such effort, including the aviation one. While we are assisting to a progressive decarbonization of the road sector, the situation with regards to the aviation is one of somewhat more complex and requires a deeper analysis. Let me just give you some data. The largest increases of greenhouse gases up to 2030 are projected in the aviation sector, followed by international maritime transport. The reason is mainly because they are not a priority for national policies. These subsectors are therefore expected to constitute a higher proportion of transport sector emissions in the coming years. Aviation was particularly affected by the COVID-19 pandemic, with international aviation emission 58% lower in 2020 than in 2019. However, a drop in emissions due to the pandemic was temporary. Air traffic activity rose by 20% in 2021, and flight numbers are expected to return to 2019 levels by 2023 at the earliest. It's also important to underline that the airline industry risks to find itself in a dangerously vulnerable position for the coming years if it doesn't take the necessary steps to decarbonize. For the sector to continue towards decarbonization, a proactive approach by all stakeholders involved is crucial in order to avoid a potential short circuit and instead encourage a long-term sustainable growth. Therefore, I consider that the initiative taken by the Aeroporti di Roma and its partner companies with the Decarbonization Pact is much useful to put in evidence the efforts of the sector towards sustainability and should be taken as an example in shaping the future EU policies and initiatives. The Fit for 55 package has been a clear step in the right direction with many initiatives, ETS, aviation, Single European Sky Plus, but in particular, the Refuel EU initiative, which aims to progressively introduce sustainable aviation fuels, will play an important role to decarbonize the sector. Sustainable aviation fuels targets alone will not, however, be sufficient. It's necessary to adopt an holistic approach which should also take into consideration the sustainability of these fuels while ensuring their availability at a sufficient quantity as well as their affordability. Although, according to several independent studies, sustainable aviation fuels are the most effective decarbonization lever, they won't be sufficient alone. Other measures like, for instance, the development of aircraft technology, operational and infrastructural improvements, the offset of residual emission will be therefore necessary. An holistic approach is therefore necessary if we want to reach the decarbonization of the sector in line with the European Green Deal objectives. And I'm therefore happy to have been invited to participate in this interesting debate with the aim of making the initiative of Aeroporti di Roma known at the European level. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you so much. I have a question now for Mr. Youngberg. Because in a recent policy paper that you guys wrote that rebuilding connectivity will depend on a number of factors, and the primary of which is the affordability of tickets, which, you know, in these days with energy prices are going up anyway. And the green transition is going to have a cost. So my question is, in short, is it achievable to recreate that connectivity in a short term in this environment?
Yes, can you hear me? Yes, so thank you very much for inviting us to be part of this event. It's a real pleasure, in particular because, of course, this is about Aeroporti di Roma and what they're doing. and Aeroporti di Roma has been a long-standing member of our organization. And I think I can say with a lot of confidence that they've always been at the forefront of the decarbonization and sustainability efforts of the industry. I think the question you're asking is, can we recover and at the same time decarbonize? I think this can be only one answer to that. There won't be any recovery long-term for this sector if we don't decarbonize at the same time. I think the reasons are pretty clear. Clearly, the climate issue is becoming an emergency. We get more and more scientific reports that tell us that we're on a trajectory of 2.7 degrees increase, so very far from achieving the Paris Agreement. And I think what is very important in the urban context is that if we look at what has happened over the past 2 years, we've seen an increasing number of European citizens experiencing firsthand the impact of climate change for the very first time. So that is shaping social and political debates, and that is putting a lot of pressure on the sector to decarbonize. And I think today, if you ask to any European airports, it is very clear that for us, this is no longer just about our license to grow in the future, but very simply and directly about our license to keep operating. So there's only one way to go. Henrik Hololei has mentioned the efforts done by the airport industry. Thank you, Henrik. We've been indeed working a lot on carbon management at airports since 2009 through our airport carbon accreditation program with the support of the European Commission, of ICAO, the UNFCCC. And I think if you look at the numbers coming out of this program, what you can see is that actually, notwithstanding COVID, you see more and more airports engaging in active carbon management, despite the difficulties economically that COVID is bringing. Just to give you a few figures, we have now 229 airports in Europe, accounting for 75% of traffic that are certified for carbon management under the program. That means airports that on a daily basis are working to reduce their carbon emissions, which is very good. And what strikes me is that since February 2020, roughly at the start of the pandemic, we had actually 80 more airports joining the program. So it shows that indeed decarbonization has remained, despite the difficulties, a very, I would say, a top priority for the industry, for the airport industry. I think when you look at how are we going to make it happen collectively with our partners, with the airlines, with the ANSPs, with the aircraft manufacturers, there's 3 top issues that come for us that we need to address, again, collaboratively with the support of our policy makers and regulators. The first one, when you look at airports, and the efforts I mentioned are very much focused on the scope 1 and 2 emissions, so those CO2 emissions that an airport actually controls. So it's the emissions mainly from the building and from the vehicle used on the ground. But clearly the big challenge is to address what we call the scope 3 emissions, the emissions from the aircraft. And there, of course, this is about what the airports can do to influence, to guide and support airlines, and especially in reducing their emissions. And the big challenge for us, and I think Henrik Hololei also mentioned that, is going to be how we are going to transform our infrastructure to ensure that we can deploy new energy at airports for electric aircraft, for hydrogen-powered aircraft. This involves a massive transformation of our facilities and massive investment. And there I come to the second issue, which is financing, which is really crucial. I think if you look back at where European airports have gone through over the past 3 years of the pandemic, it was a massive blow. We lost 20 billion euro collectively through these past 2 years. As a result, our debt has increased by 60 billion euro. So the big worry we have now is, the fact that an increasing bigger part of our future revenues have to be used to repay that debt. And that means we have much less money available potentially to invest in decarbonization. And this is again where the issue of EU financing and support is key. Philip Cornelis has mentioned the stick approach balanced with the carrot approach in the EU. And of course, we recognize the necessity of the sticks. We are fully behind the objectives of and the mandates of Refuel EU. But I think when we look more closely at what is being done across the Atlantic in the US with the Inflation Reduction Act that was mentioned, it's very clear that we need more carrots, that we need to achieve the sticks or the requirements of the sticks, that we need more carrots. In the Inflation Reduction Act in the US, we estimate that the monies available to the sector to decarbonize would be in the order of 52 billion euro. And that compares to the 1.52 billion euro of the SAF allocation fund. So clearly, we're still far, and we need to be more inventive and more courageous in the EU to get financing support for this sector. The third element, which is also very important, is policy alignment and being coherent and consistent. And that's linked to, of course, collaboration between all the sector, but also our policymakers and regulators. I won't go back too much on the single European skies, which I think is frustrating everybody, not just you, Henrik, at the moment, in terms of the slow pace and the lack of progress. But this is clearly what we need to see happening, those 10% of emissions that can be instantly reduced if we make the reform needed for the air traffic management system. The second issue is the temptation of some countries in Europe to ban short-haul flying. I think this is really ludicrous. First, because in terms of efficiency, if you look at the CO2 emissions from short-haul flying, it's 5% of aviation emissions. So you're attacking the 5%, whereas most of the emissions come from longer distance flying. But on top of that, it's the fact that actually when we look at the solutions to decarbonize aviation, and especially the new technology for aircraft, these are going to be implemented first on short-haul routes. So why are you going to kill the part of the sector that is going to be the test bed to achieve the transition? This doesn't make sense. And there I must say I'm very grateful for the Commission decision, the recent Commission decision on the French ban for some domestic routes, because that decision, although it authorizes the French government to implement this ban for a limited number of routes, it states very clearly that this ban can be only valid for a short time, the next 3 years, because from the moment Fit for 55 will come into effect, there will be no legal justification anymore under EU law for banning domestic routes. And I think that's a very important decision for the sector. Lastly, on regulatory alignment, very briefly, airport slots. Clearly, we're going to be confronted with more and more difficulties to develop future capacity at European airports. And in that context, how we allocate and use the airport slots to make sure we have a more effective use of airport capacity is going to be also very important to contribute to the decarbonization and efficiency efforts of the sector. I will stop here. Thank you very much. And we look forward to keep working, of course, with the European Commission, with the European Parliament to advance together our biggest challenge ever, decarbonizing our sector. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And now we come to the last piece of the jigsaw in the terms of the first round of speakers. So I would like to ask my question to Mr. Thomas Reinhardt. We said Managing Director for the Airlines for Europe. What is the airline point of view on all of this? I mean, in the end, you are certainly one of the most visible elements of this aviation ecosystem, because in the end, you put up the planes in the sky. So how is challenging for you? I mean, get to the results at this point.
Thank you very much, Mattia, and many thanks to the Aeroporti di Roma for the kind invitation. And indeed, a lot of things have been said also, including the role of the airlines by my colleagues from the airports, and which is fine because we are very much interconnected. You cannot talk about the case of the airports without mentioning the airlines and vice versa. So we are very much interconnected, and this is why a partnership is amongst us, of course, very important. So I will try not to duplicate too much, but some of the important things have been mentioned from an airline's perspective already. I think I wanted to maybe as a brief introduction first mention a couple of things that I think are very important. First of all, it's important to say that with Destination 2050, it is a massive but also a very critical effort from the entire European aviation sector, not only the airports, the airlines, but also the ANSPs and the manufacturers having come together and commit to this very important net zero target by 2050 through a number of stages through the roadmap. On that, it's also interesting to note that the roadmap very much mirrors the Pact for Decarbonization of Air Transport, which is the theme of today's discussion. Let's also remind ourselves that we were the first aviation sector worldwide to actually take this commitment. Shortly before IATA took the same commitment, which of course has its own challenges because it's a global, truly global commitment, but it's the same type of commitment with the same basket of measures. And I remember when we're discussing things with Olivier and the colleagues around the table, when we made this commitment, not all the partners of the other parts of the world like to see this commitment. But I'm very proud we made this commitment, and of course it's in the context of the Green Deal. We are where we are, and we are very much committed to the Green Deal, and with that, of course, also Fit for 55. I will not go into detail about the SAF at this point of time because the colleagues before already mentioned the importance, and Henrik mentioned the importance, and Philippe, of SAF in the decarbonisation effort. But it's important to state that this is not, talking about tomorrow and the long future. We're talking really about the now, and the need to have SAF at an affordable cost, but I would say even more importantly, as you alluded to, the supply. Airlines are ready to take up SAF at a higher cost. Let's be realistic, but we need to have the SAF urgently. The upcoming, finally, we will get the result hopefully on the refuel EU refuel aviation legislation very soon. We see that European Parliament, of course, is pushing more ambitious targets, but I think we need to make sure that we somehow temper the ambition with the reality given of the very low base we are coming off. But at the moment, airlines are extremely committed. At the moment, some airlines only use 1 to 2% of the SAF uptake because there's no more available. And just to finish, maybe my quick introduction is given that the onus is really, when you're talking about massively reducing CO2 emissions, the onus will be really on the airlines, because we all know most of the CO2 emissions are produced in aviation with landing and takeoff by the airlines. And this is why a continued solid partnership with the European aviation partners, not only the airports, but all the people in the supply chain. A solid partnership which will also have to include some financial solidarity. I think we need to take into account a huge challenge to get to sustainable aviation going forward, and we cannot ignore the economics around it. It's no excuse, but we have to be realistic. Now, 4 points I want to mention to your questions, Mathieu, on the perspective of airlines more specifically. First of all, to go back on SAF, is the production and the uptake. I cannot stress this enough. The initiative of the US Inflation Reduction Act has been mentioned. It is happening today. I know it's also a hugely political issue aside from our aviation challenge, but I think in a way it's an important opportunity for us to point to see what's happening on the other side of the pond. This is really happening, and we need to do better in Europe. We need to take advantage of the political dynamism around that, and in the context of the fact that it is difficult to decarbonize in aviation, we really need to take the European efforts as a result of the Inflation Reduction Act very seriously for aviation. So I see this as an opportunity at the same time. The second point is, I think we should stop losing focus of the bigger picture through what I would call ineffective but politically convenient policies in Europe. And I'm talking mainly about some national policies, whether it's to punitive taxes, or as we recently have seen in France, flight bans. These are measures that seemingly to the public will take care of reducing CO2 emissions. I think the people sitting around the table and the experts know this is just a political gesture. It's actually not going to do anything about reducing CO2 emissions, but it will take money away from the sector. So in a way, there is some contradiction. On the one hand, we've been asked to obviously spend more and accelerate investment in sustainable efforts. And on the other hand, we see measures that actually limit that, or at least punish us indirectly because of these punitive measures. I would actually also argue, airlines have been accused of some greenwashing, some more than others maybe, but I would even argue that Some of the governments are probably also greenwashing by proposing and implementing knee-jerk policies, the ones I just mentioned, that actually do very little to improve sustainability or have very little sizable impact on emissions. The third point I wanted to mention is that we need to ensure that the industry and airlines in particular can continue to invest in green transition. The debate we see around now at the level of the EU taxonomy clearly dismisses, totally doesn't recognize the urgent need not only to invest, but just the possibility for airlines and our partners to invest in sustainability. We all know that aviation is a capital intensive industry. That has not changed. On the contrary, so now is really not the time to make it even more difficult for airlines to invest. You know what the investment grade of airlines is. I don't have to give you any examples. It's always been a challenge, but in particular now, it's even more important that we do have access. And I'm talking primarily access to private capital, let alone public funding. Let's focus on private capital. So let's not make it even more difficult than it is today. And finally, I think in addition to having access to the investment capital, we need to make sure that the airlines market in Europe can remain competitive in a healthy manner, a level playing field to make sure that we can compete. Because remember, the European Commission has done huge efforts for the single aviation market. It was a great success, not completely finished yet. I think we need to continue to build, to optimize this single aviation market in a sustainable manner, more than ever. And now is, I think, the way to continue to optimize that single aviation market, make sure that we can grow in a sustainable manner, and at the same time also ensuring connectivity. They're not mutually exclusive. We can grow, and the roadmap shows it, that we can grow the industry, can continue to create jobs, that we can grow connectivity, not just preserve it, we can grow connectivity, but we can do it in a sustainable manner. But we absolutely need the regulatory framework, the European regulatory framework, to make sure it can happen. And I think just to finalize, I'm really looking forward to, I would say, the solidarity and the partnership that we have created before COVID in the context of Destination 2050, but also during COVID. We know that we can be resilient, but I do personally, there are limits, and I think this is a good test to these limits. I'm looking forward to the continued solid partnership with our friends from the airports across the board, and let's really work together also with the European Commission and the European Parliament and the Council to make sure that we have the regulatory framework. And at the end of the day, I think it's also, Henrik, that you mentioned it, this is about connectivity. I would say, let's make it sure that it's affordable connectivity, that we talk real when we bring out these measures, and let us allow please to invest. We are committed, we will invest. And yes, just to some say, will this make flying more expensive? Yes, a lot of things are becoming more expensive in life, including flying. But I think people are ready to pay for that in a sustainable manner if we can show that aviation is truly sustainable. Thank you very much.
Okay. Ms. Moretti has to go, so right, we have some time left, so we can have a second round of questions and answers. Let's see. It's been said that the role of regulators and lawmakers is key, so I would like to give some space to the lawmakers and the regulators. So, Mr. Campomenosi, you said in your opening speech that the political group now are all engaged, they are all on board, so to speak. And this is good because without division, maybe we can achieve more concrete results. At the same time, global problems need global solutions. It's been said time and time and time and again. So I would like to ask you if you see maybe a risk if Europe goes alone and maybe the US, but I mean, if the Western Front is not, is alone in the fight, and then maybe the industry can find an awkward solution because some of the routes can be rerouted, and maybe the tourism industry can suffer as well. I mean, it's not easy to coordinate what we are doing here. What is your take on that?
Well, this question would need not a panel, but a set of conferences during an entire week, because the issue is very interesting, very important, because, of course, I believe that global initiatives, as we try to make in some other sectors, are very important, would be very important, because, of course, we are not only speaking about decarbonizing the environment of our continent, but also to have a business on transport sector, not only for the aircrafts, which has to be rentable for the investors. If not, we have not investors, and above all, I also think that we could also consider, maybe the next legislators after 2024, to adapt or to modify or to consider to discuss about the competition rules, especially in this sector, in front of the efforts that the actual operators in the infrastructures, in the aircrafts are making, because the costs are very important, I think, and I feel in my political experience in this term that they are all engaged. I also follow the maritime sector, for which, for example, there is an availability of technology which is a bit easier, no? So maybe their efforts, which are also very important, could see an end in a closer moment. But, for example, Mr. Cornelis mentioned it, we need to see if a certain amount of money from ETS could be invested directly on this sector. This is the same debate we are making on the maritime sector, but on this we have to involve the member states, because part of this amount is also to be defined with them. The financial instruments issue is also very important, because if we need stuff with affordable prices, we have to subsidize it. I think that the general debate on a temporary framework on the state aid should include also this. I think that we should have Mrs. Vestager come into all the committees every time, because this is very important. I know how much she is engaged on this, and that's not only a debate between member states saying, okay, I cannot put in the market the same amount of money of Germany, but this is something for which we are debating, but we should have another how to say, view. So, another detail that it has not been mentioned here is, I think, the availability of capacity of storage of energy, because this is something for which in the maritime sector they are also thinking about. So when we speak about the infrastructure of the airports, I think we have also to start thinking about this. Maybe, of course, thanks to the connectivity and with railways, we could really have good examples, but of course, if we speak about electricity, we need also capacity of storage of electricity. And this is something for which it's very good. I saw in the Pact of Decarbonization the logos of enterprises as Enel, which are making a lot, and for which I think not only Aeroporti di Roma should work on this part. So on short-length flights, I know I also believe that it's a political decision and not something which is really focus on the impact of environmental, but of course politics is also something which is playing a role. But I think that the legislator will try to have a good balance on the final results of the legislative regulations on which we are working on. With the help of the member states and the Commission, I think we are doing something good for the future of our continent.
We heard so many things, but we also heard that intermodality can be a key, and maybe a better integrated air travel and railways can be also a solution, at least in the short term, or maybe in the medium term altogether. I mean, Mr. Cornelis, I want to ask you, from your point of view, you are one of the regulators. I mean, it's in the way you regulate the industry has a lot of impact. So it is good to hear that everybody is on board, everybody is focused to get to the point, to get result and to decarbonize the industry. But it is fair to say that maybe the air industry, it is a sector that may not be fully decarbonized in the end. And is that acceptable? I mean, may we have to confront the fact that we don't have the science to do that as fast as we do in other sectors? And do you think that is something that it is fair to say to the public that maybe that particular or a small part of the air industry may stay that way longer, because otherwise we don't get to go to places in the way that we do now?
Well, we have in the context of the Green Deal, of course, done modeling and projections, not just for 2030, but also for 2050, of all sectors of the economy. And it's clear that some will be able to decarbonize more quickly than others for technological and practical reasons. But overall, with the package that we have put on the table, with all the measures, including the ones affecting aviation, but also all the other sectors, taken together, we will reach our target. So that's, I think, the main message that we have here. It can be, of course, 2050 is still far away, and a lot of technological developments can take place between now and then. We do hope that we will have zero-emission aircraft, hydrogen-powered aircraft, but we also know that to replace the aviation fleet, it takes time. Because aircraft are a bit too expensive to replace them every 5 years. So we will need sustainable fuels for a long time, we think well beyond 2050. Some of these sustainable fuels will be almost zero emission, the ones that are produced from the synthetic fuels produced from hydrogen, whether it's renewable or nuclear hydrogen. So that will be a part of the overall picture. And beyond that, of course, aviation is also in ETS. So every emission that is still there at any given point, the sector is paying for it. And over time, these carbon emissions are becoming more expensive. So we have to see where exactly we are in 2050, but we will be able to, with the technologies that we know today and expect, to a very, very, very significant reduction, provided that we start today and that we allow the necessary investment. And I just wanted to pick up on this point, that clearly it's only going to work if there is enough investment that is stimulated to go in this direction. And here, the ongoing discussions on the European taxonomy is absolutely essential, because aviation sector is financed not from subsidies from the state, unlike other modes of transport. It's financed from loans, from private capital, and in the future, the green taxonomy will play a bigger and bigger role also for private financing. Many banks already today are saying, I want X% of my portfolio to be in the green taxonomy. So if we are not able to put aviation in the green taxonomy, we will starve the sector from investment from both public and private sectors. That's why it's very important, and we are in the process of working out a delegated act on this, which of course delegated act comes from the Commission, but we do need the political support both from the member states and the Parliament to make this happen, and it's really essential for the purposes of the decarbonization pathway that we are discussing here today.
Yes, I think we have time for a full second round of questions. So, Mr. Jankovic, again, the airports, I want to call the airports into the full picture. So, you are, as has been said, there is no plane without airports, and an airport with no planes is pretty useless. So, what you said that in the finance is another key for for you to make way for the green transitions and to pay for all these investments. But maybe it's easier from the point of view of an airport, because in the end is a facility. I mean, you are on the ground, so in a way you have a business model that is more traditional. So, do you think that the airport industry has already all that it takes now to face the transitions, or you also have a gap in terms of science, that you need time to wait for something, a magic kind of a magic instrument to come and rescue?
Thank you for your question. I think if you look at those emissions that are under the direct control of the airport, so as I mentioned earlier, the Scope 1 emissions, mainly from vehicles and buildings, and the Scope 2 emissions, so the emissions coming from purchased electricity, which is generated off-site. We have all the solutions available. It's a question of financing and being able to invest to transform the facilities, to buy vehicles that are electric, and to secure the energy production. So actually we do have already now in Europe 10 airports that have achieved net zero for Scope 1 and 2 emissions. Airports in Sweden operated by Swedavia. Of course, it was greatly facilitated because those airports have access to very cheap green electricity from the grid. And from the moment you have this, it's fairly easy. But not all airports are in the same situation. Not everybody is like Sweden in terms of production of green electricity through the grid. So those efforts needs to be, the willingness of the airports and those efforts need to be facilitated also by the energy producers, clearly nationally. Then when you look at what we call the Scope 3 emissions, so the emissions that the airport facilitates through the businesses that use the airports, and again there it's mainly the airlines, we're in the same game as the airlines, and this is why actually we worked very closely now for the last 3 years with the airlines, with Thomas, with A4E, developing the Destination 2050 roadmap for decarbonization of European aviation and achieving net zero by 2050. And I think it's fair to say we fully share all the solution, and I cannot agree more with what Thomas has said in terms of what needs to happen at European level and national level to facilitate the decarbonization of the aircraft.
Thank you. So I'll close with Mr. Reinhardt, a second round of questions for you. You said that people may be ready to pay more because they understand that they can understand what they are paying for in terms of decarbonizations, but also the industry doesn't need punitive taxes. I want to ask you a question. Maybe we also need to get a little bit creative, because when I said that the jet set was another year, maybe today we have something that is different. We have the private jet set, for instance. And those planes are consuming very much. They have a disproportionate impact on the climate emissions. So, for instance, would you define the completely crazy the idea that these private jets would be taxed more for being operated, for instance, today, or even another crazy idea that maybe who can afford business class tickets or first class tickets, maybe they could pay a little bit more for contributing to decarbonizations. I mean, the idea is like, how much can we stay? Let me rephrase it. How much creative we can be, and we need to be from now on to get to the point where we need to go. Thanks.
Interesting ideas. Obviously, I cannot comment on the business aviation aspect of things. I represent a commercial airlines. But I think we need to see it probably in a bigger picture of, we talked about, I think, of interconnectivity of the different modes of transport. Maybe a misconception, not in this room, But just to give you an idea that airlines actually are very much in favor of railways, especially railways connecting airports. And in particular, we're very much in favor of a better connectivity of high-speed rail. Because high-speed rail plays a very important role into connecting the hubs. And it's not necessarily the fact that airlines absolutely want to connect shorter distances. Depends case by case, but I think the good example is Brussels-Amsterdam. KLM has been asking for decades for a better connection, a high-speed rail connection, an efficient connection, and sufficient capacity on that high-speed connection between Brussels and Amsterdam. It's only recently that efforts are being made, progress is being made. Brussels-Paris works very well. If you book a ticket from Charles de Gaulle from Brussels, it's a train you're taking. So that model works, and it also, of course, reduces further to the reduction of CO2 emissions, you could argue. Just to come back to private versus commercial aviation, I'm, of course, very much in favor of more use of commercial aviation. To give you an example, with a load factor of about 80%, so if 80% of the seats are filled, today's aircraft, you have a consumption per passenger there of about 2.2 liters of kerosene per passenger. So actually, with the capacity in the load factor you see these days, your carbon footprint is much lower than driving your car, assuming you're not driving a full electrical car, but even a hybrid car consumes more if it runs on petrol than on average than 2.2 liters. So it is already, commercial aviation is already performing very well if you have a good load factor. And that's maybe then to finish, to put things into perspective, today we fly, if we say we fly with sustainable aviation fuels, we can fly with the current engines on a 50% blend. If you think about, we're all proud that we drive biofuels with the car, E10 is 10%. We fly 50%, and we've been flying this for years. The only trouble is we don't have enough of the fuel, but we could do a lot more, just even with the engines of today, if we have much more sustainable aviation fuels. We can go up to a reduction of 85% using today's aviation fuels. Now, with e-fuels, it's going to be even better. You can go up to 100%, you could argue. And the engines, as we speak, are being certified now to fly with basically be able to fly 100% aviation fuels. So there are actually things that are happening today. And maybe just to finish on that, we talk about single European sky, and we very much have been sharing the frustration with DG Move, Henrik and Philip in particular, that it's not making any progress. Still, not disregarding the importance of single aviation of CES2+, is that Eurocontrol, we're working very closely with the network manager, that manages the European traffic. They're doing a lot already to reduce CO2 emissions by making European traffic much more efficient. That's already happening today. The difference with CES2+ is that we can really jump up to 100% CO2 emissions today with the technologies that are available today. And this is where I would say, so commercial aviation, if you're going to fly, to be honest, I think commercial aviation is still the best option to do it in a, I would say, sustainable manner. Airlines have understood what the passengers want, what the public wants. For us, I would say regulation or no regulation, there is no way back. We have understood we need to serve the customer, and customers want to fly green. They want to continue to fly. That's the good news. But they want to fly in a sustainable manner. So I'm optimistic. Fit for 55 will help. More funding for SAF will help. But there is no way back. As for the airports, people realize fully, we want to have sustainable aviation, and we will have to serve our customers, whatever it takes. Thanks.
Thank you. I completely share the call for...
Don't allow phone calls on board, please. It's the only moment I relax without people speaking at the phone. I joke, but I know that there are developments also on 5G and things, but it's a joke, but not so much.
No, I completely agree. I share your call, and I also share the call for a better connection with Amsterdam. Okay, we are 5:01, so absolutely in time. And with that, over to you, Mr. Troncone, for your closing remarks.
Yeah, just a few final words. Again, thanks for all the participants today to dedicate again all this time and all this attention to this key theme. I think we can see that we truly succeeded in what was our ultimate goal of this for this event. So bringing together the institutional representatives in this such important institutional setting and the main actors of our industry and also our say contributors of other industries which will be again concurring in making this transition happen in the future. Cooperation will be essential, as the Director General Orley said. Cooperation, we have to continue on this path, exploiting also this moment, which is again, yeah, a challenging time frame, but at the same time also the moment in which we still feel a strong alignment, as also Philippe Cornell said. It's a moment, it's an opportunity that we have to capture. Maybe 10 years, 15 years ago, we probably couldn't have thought of bringing all actors together at the same table and to speaking with one voice. Thanks again for all the members of the steering committee of the Pact for adhering to the Pact, for all the works which made also the first annual Congress a success, and for the manifesto which was signed by all parties, which is a concrete physical evidence of the willingness to be aligned and to speak with one voice. And also thanks especially for the works in view of the next annual Congress, which will take place later this year. Discussions are progressing well in all the roundtables on several key topics, including especially intermodality. But in particular, now the group is reviewing a set of policy recommendations on all the key fronts that will be relevant for these very crucial years ahead of us. Especially, of course, on the 55 legislation, the refuel EU initiative, where trilogue negotiations are happening in these very weeks, especially on targets. Hopefully to see these targets seeing more and more consistency with what the industry will be effectively capable to deliver, and also with some support, for example, possibly utilizing revenues. This was mentioned by Mr. Campomenosi from auctioning the ETS allowances will be phasing out in 2026. This is a position that ACI Europe is strongly advocating for. Anyways, altogether, we remain very, very optimistic about the ability to succeed in the required time frame and also to attract the support by regulators. We're seeing some good developments on taxonomy, for example, in the very last developments that we saw happening very late last year. In December, we reviewed the latest issues of the FAQs on taxonomy, and we're seeing a much better those norms better recognizing the role that airports can actually cover with a broader eligibility of these activities. This is very important when it comes also to attract the support of the financing world. But we know, anyways, we will have to deserve such support. And to that end, again, for this reason, this is why we're here today, to implement whatever we can to gain ground immediately here and now, but also to commit to define a way forward in which all actors, institutional and industry players, share the merit, the potential to preserve and further develop a sector which is essential for economic development, for social enrichment, and for freedom. Thank you very much.
Non abbiamo applaudito nessun intervento.
Grazie.